I always knew my sister hated me, but I never imagined she would try to steal Grandpa's fortune just because I was adopted. What happened next changed everything, and she never saw it coming. If you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, hit subscribe and like this video. You're about to hear a story of betrayal, cunning, and the sweetest kind of justice. The tension had been simmering for as long as I could remember. Growing up as the adopted daughter, I always felt like an outsider, carefully observing the family rituals that were never truly mine. My sister, Lara, thrived in this environment. She smiled brighter, laughed louder, and made it her life's mission to ensure that everyone noticed her first. Everything she did was calculated. The way she angled herself in photographs, the subtle boasts about achievements, the insinuations that I would never measure up. But Grandpa, he was different. He had always seen me. I remember the quiet afternoons spent in his study, listening to stories of our ancestors, learning the nuances of the family business, and observing the properties he had built from nothing. He never treated me as less than because I had been adopted. To him, blood didn't determine worth. Integrity and effort did. And because of that, I had spent years quietly learning everything he taught, all while keeping my sister's schemes at bay. The first real sign that Lara intended to cheat me came on a sunny afternoon, the day Grandpa's health began to noticeably decline. I had been visiting him in his study, helping him sort through old letters and photographs. Lara breezed in, as always, with her designer handbag swinging at her side and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Ellie," she said, glancing at me with feigned sweetness. "Grandpa mentioned he wants everything settled soon. Don't worry about it. You wouldn't understand the complexities of inheritance anyway." I froze, my hand still on the faded photograph I had been holding. The warmth from the sunlight streaming through the window suddenly felt like heat from a fire burning in my chest. My fingers tingled. My heart raced. I forced myself to smile. "I think I understand more than you realize," I said carefully. Every word was measured, every tone deliberate. I couldn't give her the slightest hint that I was aware of her schemes. That would be a mistake. Lara laughed lightly, that patronizing, high-pitched sound I had grown to despise. "Oh, Ellie, you always try so hard. But let us be honest. Grandpa probably wouldn't leave much to someone who isn't really family, right?" The words hit me like a punch. I could feel my chest tighten, my stomach nodding in disbelief. How could she say that? How could anyone reduce a lifetime of love, loyalty, and effort to bloodlines alone? I clenched my fists, forcing the tremor in my hands to calm. I left Grandpa E.'s study that day with a quiet resolve forming in the pit of my stomach. Lara may have underestimated me, but I would not be outmaneuvered. I would prove that I belonged, not just because of what Grandpa had promised me, but because I had earned it. Over the next few weeks, I began to observe her with the precision of a strategist. Every casual conversation she had about the will, every sly comment to my mother or Grandpa, I documented mentally. I noticed the way she tried to subtly influence decisions, her sly glances when speaking about assets, and the patronizing tones she used to make me feel small. Each detail became a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. Meanwhile, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I reviewed legal documents, researched the inheritance laws in our state, and even consulted discreet legal advisors. I needed to understand every loophole, every clause, and every restriction that could be used to protect what was rightfully mine. Every night, I pored over files at my kitchen table, my laptop casting a bluish glow on my determined face. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I scribbled notes, mapped out scenarios, and anticipated Lara's moves. The household itself was a stage for the tension building. Dinner conversations became battlegrounds. Every compliment my parents gave Lara felt like a dagger aimed at my chest. My mother would casually remark on my adoption during these meals, as if to remind me of my place. The sting of those words was like salt in a wound. Yet I kept my composure, smiling politely, nodding along, while inside the fire of anger and resolve burned brighter. One evening, I overheard Lara on the phone, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, make sure Grandpa thinks she doesn't understand the legalities. We can keep her distracted while we finalize the property allocations." My blood ran cold. She was not just greedy, she was willing to manipulate, deceive, and erase me from my grandfather's legacy. I retreated to my room that night, pacing the length of the hardwood floor. My thoughts swirled. She underestimates me. She thinks I am naive. She thinks I will fold under the pressure. I paused at the window, looking out at the garden Grandpa loved so dearly. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze calmed me slightly. No, I would not fold. I would plan carefully, act strategically, and claim what was mine, every last bit. Days turned into weeks. Each family interaction became a test of patience and observation. I noticed every slight hesitation, every overeager nod, every attempt Lara made to subtly undermine my presence. My heart would pound during these encounters, but I learned to channel that anxiety into focus. I developed a meticulous plan, gather undeniable proof of my legal rights, anticipate every move she would make, and ensure that when the final moment came, I would not just claim what was mine, I would do so in a way that would leave no doubt in anyone Awa's mind. The emotional toll was heavy. Some nights, I would lie awake, the weight of the injustice pressing on my chest. My mind would replay Lara's smug expressions, my mother's subtle condescension, and the quiet disbelief in Grandpa's eyes when he noticed the tension between us. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, my stomach tight with anticipation and anxiety. But alongside the fear was a growing clarity. I was no longer just a passive observer in this family drama. I was a strategist, a protector of my own legacy, and I would not allow anyone, especially my sister, to diminish my rightful place. Finally, the day of the will reading approached. The house felt electric, a tangible tension that made every creak of the floorboards echo like a warning. Lara entered as always, confident and radiant, fully believing she had won before the game had even begun. She smiled at me, a sly, knowing smile that was meant to unsettle me. My mother, predictably, sided with her, throwing subtle remarks about my adoption, about how I might not understand the complexities of the inheritance. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, but I refused to show it. Every inch of me radiated calm determination. I had prepared for this moment for months. Let her believe she had the upper hand. Let her bask in her false sense of victory. Grandpa entered the room, his presence commanding yet gentle. He gave me a glance, subtle but filled with meaning, a signal that he trusted me to handle this, to see justice done. My resolve hardened. No one, not even my sister or my parents, would manipulate me out of my rightful place. As the will reading began, my mind ran through the plan once more. Every clause I had studied, every legal loophole I had identified, every strategy I had meticulously crafted would be ready. I would act with precision, ensuring that the injustice that had loomed over me for years would finally be corrected. And deep down, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Lara had no idea what was coming. She had spent her life believing she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated one crucial factor. I was ready. I was prepared. And when the final words of Grandpa's will were read, the truth would be undeniable. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm on the horizon, ominous, tense, and impossible to ignore. The house felt suffocating, heavy with anticipation. Every hallway, every room seemed to hum with the unspoken conflict that had been brewing for months. I could feel it in the slight quiver of my hands, in the subtle tightening of my chest as I prepared to face not just my sister, but the entire family. Lara had arrived early, of course, wearing a carefully chosen ensemble designed to project superiority. Her designer heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors, a sound I could practically feel vibrating through my bones. She glanced at me with a smirk, clearly enjoying the discomfort she believed she had caused me. My mother hovered behind her posture rigid with approval, clearly basking in the illusion of Lara's dominance. One evening, I overheard Lara on the phone, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, make sure Grandpa thinks she doesn't understand the legalities. We can keep her distracted while we finalize the property allocations." My blood ran cold. She was not just greedy, she was willing to manipulate, deceive, and erase me from my grandfather's legacy. I retreated to my room that night, pacing the length of the hardwood floor. My thoughts swirled. She underestimates me. She thinks I am naive. She thinks I will fold under the pressure. I paused at the window, looking out at the garden Grandpa loved so dearly. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze calmed me slightly. No, I would not fold. I would plan carefully, act strategically, and claim what was mine, every last bit. Days turned into weeks. Each family interaction became a test of patience and observation. I noticed every slight hesitation, every overeager nod, every attempt Lara made to subtly undermine my presence. My heart would pound during these encounters, but I learned to channel that anxiety into focus. I developed a meticulous plan, gather undeniable proof of my legal rights, anticipate every move she would make, and ensure that when the final moment came, I would not just claim what was mine. I would do so in a way that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. The emotional toll was heavy. Some nights, I would lie awake, the weight of the injustice pressing on my chest. My mind would replay Lara's smug expressions, my mother's subtle condescension, and the quiet disbelief in Grandpa's eyes when he noticed the tension between us. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, my stomach tight with anticipation and anxiety. But alongside the fear was a growing clarity. I was no longer just a passive observer in this family drama. I was a strategist, a protector of my own legacy, and I would not allow anyone, especially my sister, to diminish my rightful place. Finally, the day of the will reading approached. The house felt electric, a tangible tension that made every creak of the floorboards echo like a warning. Lara entered as always, confident and radiant, fully believing she had won before the game had even begun. She smiled at me, a sly, knowing smile that was meant to unsettle me. My mother, predictably, sided with her, throwing subtle remarks about my adoption, about how I might not understand the complexities of the inheritance. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, but I refused to show it. Every inch of me radiated calm determination. I had prepared for this moment for months. Let her believe she had the upper hand. Let her bask in her false sense of victory. Grandpa entered the room, his presence commanding yet gentle. He gave me a glance, subtle but filled with meaning, a signal that he trusted me to handle this, to see justice done. My resolve hardened. No one, not even my sister or my parents, would manipulate me out of my rightful place. As the will reading began, my mind ran through the plan once more. Every clause I had studied, every legal loophole I had identified, every strategy I had meticulously crafted would be ready. I would act with precision, ensuring that the injustice that had loomed over me for years would finally be corrected. And deep down, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Lara had no idea what was coming. She had spent her life believing she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated one crucial factor. I was ready. I was prepared. And when the final words of Grandpa's will were read, the truth would be undeniable. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm on the horizon, ominous, tense, and impossible to ignore. The house felt suffocating, heavy with anticipation. Every hallway, every room seemed to hum with the unspoken conflict that had been brewing for months. I could feel it in the slight quiver of my hands, in the subtle tightening of my chest as I prepared to face not just my sister, but the entire family. Lara had arrived early, of course, wearing a carefully chosen ensemble designed to project superiority. Her designer heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors, a sound I could practically feel vibrating through my bones. She glanced at me with a smirk, clearly enjoying the discomfort she believed she had caused me. My mother hovered behind her, her posture rigid with approval, clearly basking in the illusion of Lara's dominance. Grandpa, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, turned to me and gave a subtle nod. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a reinforcement of the trust and respect that had always existed between us. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mix of relief and triumph. The struggle had been intense, but the outcome was within reach. The final challenge came in the form of my mother's attempt to sway Grandpa, using emotional appeals and reminders of tradition. "Ellie, you must understand," she said softly, almost pleading. "This is about family history. This is about blood. Lara has always been the one to carry forward the family name." I held my composure, my gaze steady. "Mom, family is more than blood," I said calmly. "It is about actions, integrity, and respect. Grandpa has entrusted me with this because I have earned it. That is the standard that matters." Her face fell, a mixture of frustration and reluctant acceptance. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the weight of years of tension slowly dissipating as the truth settled over us. Lara sank into a chair, her posture slumped, defeated in a way that was almost tragic to witness. I allowed myself a brief moment to revel in the culmination of my careful planning, but I also recognized the deeper significance. This struggle had not been merely about inheritance or wealth. It had been about asserting my value, demonstrating my intelligence, and reclaiming respect that had long been withheld. As the afternoon wore on, the legal formalities were completed. The documents were signed, witnessed, and notarized. Every challenge had been met, every objection addressed. The house, once a battlefield of subtle manipulations and hidden tensions, now felt resolutely aligned with justice. Yet the emotional landscape remained complex. My sister's face, pale and stunned, reflected not just the loss of anticipated wealth, but the unraveling of her self-perception. My mother, while outwardly composed, struggled to reconcile her expectations with the undeniable reality. And I, though victorious, felt the bittersweet weight of having fought my own family for acknowledgement and fairness. I stepped out onto the terrace, the cool afternoon air brushing against my skin. The city stretched out below, a patchwork of rooftops, parks, and streets. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the profound sense of triumph and relief. The struggle had been long, intense, and emotionally taxing, but I had prevailed. Inside, the family gathered quietly, the tension palpable. Conversations were hesitant, strained, and tinged with a new understanding. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I had claimed what was rightfully mine, not through anger or deceit, but through patience, preparation, and unwavering determination. And yet, as I returned indoors, I understood that this was only part of the journey. The inheritance was secured, yes, but the true victory lay in the respect I had earned, the justice I had enforced, and the legacy I was now responsible for safeguarding. The struggle had not been easy. It had demanded emotional resilience, strategic foresight, and a steadfast belief in my own worth. But as I looked at my sister, my mother, and even the witnesses who had observed the proceedings, I felt a profound sense of clarity. I had not only defended my inheritance, I had asserted my identity, my capability, and my rightful place in the family and the world. The aftermath of the will reading left the house eerily quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. I could feel the lingering tension like a tight knot in my chest, a mixture of triumph and the awareness that the most delicate phase of this journey was only beginning. Securing my inheritance was not the end. It was the beginning of reclaiming not just my property, but my dignity, and ensuring those who had tried to undermine me understood the full weight of justice. I retreated to the study, a room filled with the subtle scent of aged mahogany and leather-bound tomes. The golden afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles that seemed suspended in time. I sank into the high-backed chair, letting the plush leather envelop me as I allowed my mind to wander over the events of the day. Lara's stunned expression, my mother's awkward attempts to regain composure, and Grandpa's calm satisfaction all played across my memory like a reel. Yet beneath the surface of triumph, a strategic calculation began to take shape. I knew that while the legal battle had been won, the emotional and social battle had only just begun. Lara would not simply accept defeat. She would attempt to manipulate family, friends, and even business associates to undermine my position. My mother, ever protective of appearances, would find subtle ways to reassert control. I needed to act with precision, turning their underestimation of me into my advantage. I started by reviewing every interaction, every subtle slight, every comment that had undermined my confidence over the years. Each memory became data, each insult a stepping stone for my plan. Lara had always believed that my adoption placed me outside the true inner circle of the family. She had counted on the perception of weakness, the narrative she had constructed of me as the outsider. Now, I could use that very assumption against her. The first step was information. I had long cultivated meticulous records of family finances, property ownership, and historical transactions. My inheritance included assets, but also power, an ability to influence outcomes in ways that my sister had never imagined. I spent hours reviewing documents, cross-referencing legal holdings, and identifying every point where her claims could falter if tested publicly. Every loophole she had ever exploited was now a potential trap, and I intended to use them all. I also focused on my allies. Grandpa had long been a subtle supporter of my independence, and I knew his influence would be crucial if further disputes arose. I reached out discreetly to trusted family advisors, legal counsel, and financial consultants, presenting them with a clear picture: every asset, every holding, every potential challenge, and my plan to preempt it. Their response was enthusiastic. They were eager to see justice executed as meticulously as I had designed it. Meanwhile, Lara continued her attempts to assert dominance. She arranged private meetings with distant relatives, whispering insinuations and questioning my right to the inheritance. I allowed her to speak, listening closely to every word, every tone, every hesitation. I took notes mentally, cataloging her strategies and preparing countermeasures. By allowing her to underestimate my awareness, I gave myself the ultimate advantage: insight into her thinking before she even realized I was observing. One afternoon, she cornered me in the library, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor like the drumbeat of a challenge. "Ellie?" she said, her voice a mixture of faux sweetness and veiled aggression. "You may have the legal documents, but you will never truly belong here. Everyone knows it. Everyone except Grandpa, apparently." I studied her carefully, noting the way her eyes flicked to the windows, the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the spine of a book she wasn't reading. These were the small tells of someone on the defensive, someone aware that the ground was shifting beneath her feet. I smiled softly, deliberately calm. "Lara," I said evenly, "belonging is earned through actions, not assumptions. That is something you seem to forget." Her face flushed crimson and she snapped, "You're impossible. You think you're better than all of us, but you're just—" She faltered, unable to complete the insult, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction. The seed of self-doubt had been planted, just as I had planned. I spent the following days meticulously setting the stage for the next phase of the plan. I contacted key business associates, subtly highlighting my achievements and capabilities while allowing the narrative of my previous outsider status to lend dramatic weight. Every email, every phone call, every meeting reinforced my authority, quietly undermining Lara's credibility and reminding everyone that I was not only the rightful heir, but the most capable one. At night, I would lie awake, replaying the interactions of the day. My mind worked like a precision instrument, dissecting every word, every glance, every subtle gesture. I visualized each potential scenario, preparing responses and countermeasures. It was exhausting, yet exhilarating. The tension of anticipation mingled with the thrill of strategic dominance. One evening, I discovered a critical piece of information. Lara had been relying on a forged claim regarding one of the smaller properties, hoping to present it as evidence of entitlement. The moment I realized this, a surge of determination flooded through me. This was the opening I had been waiting for, the perfect opportunity to consolidate my position and turn her own deceit against her. I spent hours compiling proof of the forgery, arranging documents chronologically, and preparing a detailed presentation that would leave no room for doubt. The next morning, I invited Grandpa, my legal team, and a few neutral family advisors to review the evidence. The air was thick with anticipation as I laid out the case. Every falsified signature, every misleading document, every attempt to manipulate the narrative. Grandpa's eyes were sharp, his approval evident in the subtle nods he gave me. Lara, when confronted, could only sputter and turn red with anger and humiliation. The meticulously prepared evidence was irrefutable, and I had anticipated every possible defense she might attempt. As the confrontation unfolded, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline mixed with a deep, calm satisfaction. This was not about cruelty or spite. It was about justice, about correcting the imbalance that had long been allowed to fester. I spoke clearly, deliberately, emphasizing the facts and leaving no room for emotional manipulation. My voice was steady, authoritative, and unwavering, projecting the confidence I had cultivated through years of careful planning. By the end of the day, the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Lara's credibility had been undermined publicly, her claims thoroughly discredited. My mother, though outwardly composed, could no longer argue against the evidence. The family advisors acknowledged the thoroughness of my preparation, and Grandpa's quiet smile was the only approval I truly needed. I retreated to the terrace once more, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The city lights stretched out below, twinkling like distant stars. I allowed myself a moment to reflect, to savor the subtle victories that had been achieved through patience, foresight, and unwavering determination. The struggle had been intense, but the turning point had been reached. The stage was set for the final act of strategic triumph. And as I gazed out into the night, I understood the truth that had guided me all along. Real power is not taken through anger or confrontation alone. It is earned through preparation, intelligence, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every move has been anticipated, every outcome controlled, and every injustice rectified with precision. The final phase, the ultimate execution of justice and the satisfaction of seeing those who had doubted me fully humbled, was within reach. The anticipation of that moment, carefully cultivated, was almost intoxicating. Every sleepless night, every carefully planned maneuver, every observation of human behavior had led to this point. I was ready. The morning of the final confrontation arrived with a brittle clarity. The sky was a pale, untroubled blue that made the house look smaller, as if the world outside had no idea a battle was taking place within its walls. I dressed with care, choosing a suit that spoke of authority without shouting. The fabric hugged my shoulders in the right way. The color was deliberate, serious, composed, unyielding. I wanted my appearance to be an instrument of the message I intended to deliver, not a distraction from it. I arrived early, before most of the household had fully awakened to the possibility that their assumptions could be overturned. The house smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. Photographs of ancestors hung on the walls, smiling forever in sepia and oil. Those portraits were the exact image of the family myth my sister had tried to weaponize. Today, that myth would be challenged. I walked through the rooms with purpose, carrying a slim, leather-bound folder that contained everything I needed. Every page was organized, every signature highlighted, every discrepancy annotated. I had rehearsed the flow of the conversation so many times that the words felt familiar in my mouth. I had also rehearsed my pauses, my returns to facts, the calm cadence that would make argument unnecessary. My lawyer, two trusted financial advisors, and Grandpa's longtime accountant were waiting in the study. We were a small, deliberate coalition. I stood at the head of the room and let the silence sit for a heartbeat. The family trickled in, drawn by the gravity of the appointment, each face a study in confidence or strain. Lara entered with that same practiced air of entitlement she had perfected over a lifetime. My mother followed, her posture a blend of expectation and the smallest crack of apprehension. A few cousins arrived with polite smiles, uncertain which side to take. The air smelled faintly of perfume and the metallic tang of nerves. I opened the folder and began. "I want to start with the facts," I said. My voice was neither loud nor soft. It carried the weight of preparation. I projected only enough warmth to be human and only enough steel to be taken seriously. Everything I am about to show you is documented, notarized, and verified by independent professionals. Grandpa looked at me then. He gave a small nod. The signal was quiet but absolute. He had placed his trust in me, and that trust felt like an arm of steady support. I proceeded methodically. I showed the forged document first. The signature that Lara had used to shore up her claim was a crude imitation. Forensic analysis confirmed that the ink and pen strokes did not match the authenticated signatures my grandfather had used for decades. I placed the report on the table and let the silence press in. It felt like a physical thing. Lara's face lost its color. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had nothing polished to say. Next, I presented the trail of communications she had orchestrated to create a narrative. Message threads, altered emails, a chain of calls timed to create confusion during key moments. Each entry had been corroborated. Each attempt at obfuscation had a corresponding counterpoint that exposed the intent. I spoke calmly as I explained how her plan had unfolded. I did not smear her character. I described actions and consequences. That was far more effective. Then I turned to the assets. I called forward the property holdings she had been aggressively pursuing. I explained how I had preemptively secured certain trusts and restructured holdings in ways that respected Grandpa's desires while protecting their long-term integrity. I explained the fiduciary decisions I had recommended and put into action. They sounded domestic, almost technical, but each sentence landed like a weight on a scale that was tipping toward fairness. At one point, my mother attempted to interject. She sprang to her feet, pearls clinking against her chest. "Ellie, you are making this personal," she said, voice sharp. "You are embarrassing the family." I met her eye steadily. "This is not personal. This is legal and ethical," I replied. "This is precisely the kind of stewardship Grandpa wanted. If by insisting on proper procedure I am making our family look bad, then perhaps the family needed a reality check." She stammered, searching for a comeback. Lara reached for the posture of indignation, of wounded entitlement. It was theatrical and small. Her gestures felt like the last flailing efforts of someone watching their carefully constructed world disintegrate. The more she protested, the more clear it became that her position was untenable. We moved through the packet. I introduced witnesses to transactions, people who had dealt directly with me and whose testimony confirmed both my actions and my motives. I called forward emails that revealed Lara's private admissions of greed. Each document was a scalpel. Each witness was a light that showed what had been doctored in shadow. At a certain point, the room stopped moving, as if people had been frozen mid-breath. The change was subtle but real. Conversations that had previously orbited the family's assumptions now angled toward the facts on the table. Insurance agents quietly nudged their chairs forward. An old family friend, a man who had once casually dismissed me, looked at me with a new recognition. He whispered something to my grandfather that I could not hear, and Grandpa's hand, frail but decisive, closed around my name like a benediction. Lara's breakdown was small and contained, the kind that still felt public because it shattered a private performance. She tried to accuse me of overreach. She tried to claim that my actions were manipulative. I used that moment to show the ledger of my stewardship, the maintenance logs, the renovations I had approved, the tenants I had rescued from exploitative contracts, the neighborhood projects I had funded that had quietly improved property values. The ledger told a clearer story than any dramatic plea she could manufacture. People stopped wanting to take sides. They wanted clarity. They wanted to know who had stewarded the properties with skill, who had worked with advisors to put the family on stable footing, and who had merely consumed privileges without the patience of responsibility. The evidence spoke its own language. When the legal advisors summarized their findings, their voices were clinical and careful. They affirmed that the claims Lara had advanced did not withstand scrutiny. They advised that the proper course was to enforce Grandpa's documented intent and to preserve family assets according to the mechanisms he had put in place. The advisors closed their files with the flat thud of finality. I felt a quiet sense of completion that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with fidelity to truth. After the meeting, there was no theatrical reconciliation. That was not the point. There were small conversations held in corners. My mother retreated to an upstairs room where she cried quietly into a handkerchief. It was a sound I had known for years, the brittle rustle of a life made brittle by unmet expectations. I felt a pang of something that was not pure joy. It had been costly to dismantle that illusion. Outside, the late afternoon light softened the house, turning the stone and brick golden. I stepped into the garden where Grandpa liked to sit on summer evenings. He was there, bundled in a familiar cardigan, a cup of tea in his hands. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him, small and luminous, like someone who had weathered a dozen storms and decided that there was no point in pretending anything other than fragility and clarity. He lifted his chin. "You did not have to do all of that," he said, voice thin but steady. "I knew you would. I trusted you. Thank you for being faithful to what matters." We sat for a long time in quiet companionship. There was no need for elaborate thanks. We had exchanged something truer than words: understanding, trust, and the completion of a covenant. He had believed in me when others had not. What I had done was not revenge in the simple sense. It was enactment of the trust he had placed in me and the promise I had made to honor his legacy. Yet the aftermath reached beyond Grandpa and me. There were consequences that would ripple outward. Lara withdrew, first from social gatherings, and then from the family ledger of influence. Her smirks were replaced by a careful, watchful posture. She started attending fewer dinners where our relatives gathered. The cousins who had once flattered her began to avoid showing up early. People who had once orbited her began to call me directly for guidance. A slow but perceptible shift had taken place. My mother took time to process. In public, she maintained an ambivalent composure. In private, she offered small apologies, awkward and halting, as she tried to reconcile the daughter she had always preferred with the woman who had proven indispensable. I accepted some things, declined others. There are versions of forgiveness I am willing to offer and terms I am not. The relationship with my mother became a negotiation of boundaries and honest requests. It was messy and honest in a way that family sometimes is only after heirs are stripped away. Neighbors and business associates who had privately cheered on Lara IS assumed victory now approached me with curiosity, then respect. They asked questions about investment strategies and property management, about the renovations that had increased rental incomes, about the philanthropic projects I had quietly funded in neighborhoods the family had once ignored. Their questions were practical, and at times surprisingly tender. It was as if the fact of my stewardship made them reassess their own assumptions about who deserved attention and trust. There were, of course, critics who suggested I had acted too harshly, who lamented the public nature of the exposure. The world loves a neat reconciliation, and my method disrupted that tidy arc. Others whispered that I had been ruthless, For a while, the gossip would murmur through the family circuit. I allowed it to. If the price of clarity was a few messy conversations in private corners, then that price was acceptable. As the weeks unfolded, the estate stabilized under the legal and financial structures we had put into place. Tenants who had been concerned about potential instability received letters explaining the continuity of stewardship. Long-term projects continued. The philanthropic initiatives I had established moved forward with renewed focus. The community began to see the practical benefits of careful leadership, not just the drama of a legal confrontation. Lara's recovery was slow and incomplete. She attempted, at first, to reclaim lost influence through social gestures and performative generosity. Those gestures rang hollow. People began to sense that material displays without consistent, reliable action do not sustain trust. Slowly, some doors closed to her. Slowly, others opened to more consistent, principled leadership. It was not cruel. It was consequence. I, meanwhile, attended to the quieter duties that ownership and stewardship required. There were meetings with architects, conversations with trustees, and detailed reviews of budgets. I spent time walking properties, speaking with tenants, and listening to local leaders. The tasks themselves were grounding. They reminded me why I had fought not simply for assets, but for the capacity to steward them well. At night, when the house grew quiet and the portraits on the walls became mere canvases, I allowed myself to feel the complexity of what had transpired. There was relief, certainly. There was also a mourning for what had been lost in the course of the struggle. Trust that could not be easily restored. Illusions that had once protected my family from facing certain truths. And an acceptance that relationships are often recalibrated by honesty in ways that are not tidy or painless. Yet beneath all of that, a clearer sense of purpose settled in. I had not sought to humiliate my sister. I had sought to protect a legacy and to honor the intentions of a man who had trusted me. The fulfillment I felt was not giddy triumph. It was a sober, steady recognition that justice, when pursued with patience and precision, yields a lasting peace that outlasts the momentary thrill of exposure. At the end of one long day, I found Grandpa again and sat beside him on the porch steps. He reached out and took my hand in his. "You did the right thing," he said simply. "You held true to what matters most." I squeezed his fingers, feeling the thinness of his skin and the steadiness of his grip. "I could not let it go otherwise," I said. "You taught me better than that." We sat in silence for a long time, two people joined by a quiet covenant. The house, the land, the ledgers, they were important, practical things. But the deeper inheritance was never solely financial. It was the permission to act with integrity, to demand fairness, and to insist that stewardship matters more than entitlement. That was the legacy Grandpa had entrusted to me. In the days that followed, the family learned to live with a new balance. Some relationships healed slowly. Others never quite returned to what they had been. That was a cost I accepted willingly. The larger good endured. When I walked the property in the evening light, the cottages and facades looked the same as they always had, yet everything felt different. The work ahead was not about proving anything to the people who had doubted me. It was about honoring the trust that had been placed in my hands and using that trust to build a future that reflected the values Grandpa had embodied. The shock my sister experienced was not a spectacle for my entertainment. It had been a necessary correction, a clearing of the air that allowed truth to rekindle the simple, essential work of stewardship. In that clearing, I took my place with quiet resolve, ready to do the work so that the real inheritance, the daily acts of care and responsibility, would endure long after the headlines faded. If there is one lesson this taught me, it is that power is not the same as stewardship. Anyone can inherit wealth. Not everyone can steward it well. The difference is patient care, ethical management, and the willingness to make difficult, sometimes lonely decisions for the long term. I reclaimed more than property. I reclaimed my name, my dignity, and the right to protect what mattered. If this story struck a chord with you, like the video and subscribe for more true tales where resilience and intelligence reshape lives. Share your experiences in the comments. How did you reclaim what was rightfully yours? Your story might inspire someone else to stand firm with dignity and strategy.